All right.
Jeff, glad to be here. I am been looking forward to getting back together, and very excited about having Kyle back and Zach and Dawid. I'm sorry, Dave. How do I actually say your name?
Morning, Alan. So my rhyme to my fellow people in the United States is it's Dawid. So it's David with a W like in Washington, but pronounced with the V like in Virginia.
Got it.
Usually it's the sweet spot.
Dawid, correct?
Perfect.
Nailed it.
Thank you.
You got it right the first time, but I apologize. And Jay, it's good to see that we have a new face, a new opportunity to share some more technology and things going on. You got a dad joke for us? Not to put you on the spot right off the bat, but let's get this thing started.
This is the initiation, isn't it? Every video that I've watched of you guys, it always puts right on the spot. So I'm glad I watched these. But I only know 25 letters of the alphabet. I don't know why.
That can become an issue, especially when you want to, talk to someone about you.
Very good.
All right, so Jeff, everything working all right?
Yeah. So we're live on LinkedIn as well as YouTube. Hey, listen, to our guests, thank you so much for joining this broadcast, and to our audience, this is your opportunity to ask any questions that you'd like of Kyle, of Dawid, Zach at Phoenix Contact, Jay at Influx. Just use the chat, and I'll be monitoring it throughout. Hey, Alan, it's tough being a parent and staying within the letters of the law, especially when it comes to young kids and having to put them down each day so they can get the rest. You're either resisting arrest or you're caught with a kidnapping. I don't know how you win on either side.
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah, but speaking of kidnapping, did you hear about the school that had the kidnapping?
Yeah, he woke up.
Yeah, he woke up. It was all fine.
he woke up. Yep. I know that one. Oh man, you ready to kick off? Here we go. What do we? Today's conversation is around next Wednesday's virtual workshop, and we're going to feature an environment or a situation that's pretty commonplace in a lot of operational environments, right? It's that fragile infrastructure. So how do we get data out of an operational site to an enterprise for data analytics? How do we pull that off without touching a historian? So let's start our conversation really around this concept of the historians at sites, brownfield operations. How many times have we seen applications where there's not a historian? How many times have we seen applications where the historian is running on 15-year-old hardware, super fragile, it's been maxed out a long time ago, everybody's scared to death to touch it, let alone put another interface to it? Dawid, you've got a deep background in integration work. Walk us through a little bit about what you've seen out in the field.
So Jeff, to put it in context, and I mean, it all depends on the maturity level of the manufacturer. So yes, believe it or not, there's still manufacturers out there that doesn't have a process historian to start with. But then let's fast forward and go and assume there's people or companies that has matured and they've seen the value of a process historian with the analysis tools that goes with it, etc. But if what I've typically seen is when that process historian does what it's supposed to do, it's also very protective from an environment perspective. People say, look, it's logging data, please don't upset me. And the challenge now is that we all know data is the new oil. So people, the more, the better. So people want that data that's locked up in the historian in order to feed that into an enterprise for whatever reason. We'll talk about the specific reasons. So now it becomes this little bit of a OT, IT kind of fight again, probably caused by the bottom and not the top this time, of saying, well, I can give you the data, but please don't break my historian. So I'd rather you not connect to my historian to get the data. So how do you overcome that? And I think that really sets the scene in terms of what we want to discuss today and obviously show the audience next week. That's just a simple example.
Yeah. So
you run into problems too when you start having a lot of these baked in HMIs that have, you know, they're using cache, or they're just storing the history as in real time over 7 days or what have you. But the moment you reboot your computer or you restart anything, you lose it. You're starting back at day one, and then you can't go beyond what is on the trend screen. And so you see a lot of that, especially with some of these local HMIs. And so how do we as an industry start helping people really be able to capture that data and use it for whether it's troubleshooting, analytics, or really driving value from our data, right? That's one of the biggest problems that we have, as especially when our kind of in the industrial operational technology space, is monetizing our data for anything other than just keeping the system running. And it's a mindset too, I think. But
yeah, I feel from our point of view as well,
Yeah,
when we, oh, sorry, go on. What we see
No, it's
is,
all right. Go ahead, Jay.
cheers, Zach. Is that like when we come onto a shop floor and someone's looking at what we're doing and bringing in a different historian, is there's that naivety from an IT level where, you know, you have your data scientists and everyone else that want to pull this data every second, or they want this collection of 100,000 samples, and they don't realize that these historians were built for one purpose and you know, to be highly durable in their initial results of what they're trying to deliver. But when you're trying to hit them with these IT examples, which can be really inefficient in their use case, this is where the problems happen. You know, you see the collapses because they're using them in a way that we don't deem appropriate for those historians and what they were designated or designed for. And I think that's the main thing that we see as a core issue for a lot of these historians, and how can we separate between that world a little bit more, or at least try and accommodate or bridge that world.
Jay, you're spot on. And you know, this really is stuff that I've experienced in previous relationships, working with Canary. Great historian, not a reflection on Canary's product, but I've seen other historians, right, where they were optimized for writing. They are optimized for their own trending tool. And then they said, oh, we have an API available. An IT team hits that API, writes a bad API, and shuts that historian down, right? And the second that happens, the operations side says, no, never again. You don't get to touch this. We need this, right? And so that is part of that fragility. And the reality is, though, that there's thousands of manufacturers that don't have appropriate historians for their operation. They still haven't for whatever reason matured to that decision to put something that's newer in. It could be because of cost, it could be because of priority. For whatever reason, that is the situation we see all the time in brownfield. So yes, should you go put in a historian that's appropriate for your operation? Absolutely. But let's say that that's not on your agenda today, tomorrow, or the next year. How do we enable data analytics, and how do we enable our enterprise to be able to reach into the operation and have a gateway to pull raw, high-resolution data without shutting down that operation or risking that operation's existing data infrastructure? And that's really what we want to tackle in our project next week. And we've got, I think it would be a good time to introduce the architecture, just so that we can then speak around the architecture. I don't know how this camera is going to switch around. Who's going to get cut off? Somebody's going to get cut off. Sorry, Jay, you got cut off. Let's talk about the roles of the project for next week. So we've got PLC Next, Phoenix Contact. Zach, who's joining us next week, and who's going to do our demo for the Phoenix Contact team?
Yeah, so next week we should have Peter Mannon joining us. Peter Mannon is one of our control systems and IIoT engineers. He was actually our first one that we implemented in the field. He's based out of Arizona, so not too far from Phoenix, even though Phoenix Contact USA is not based in Phoenix, Arizona. We're actually out of Middletown, Pennsylvania. But he'll be joining us, and he's one of the experts in the field when it comes to control and IIoT. And he helped the team here get data pumping up into the Kepware and Software Toolbox side. So
Awesome. You want to give a quick little plug on what is PLC Next for someone who hasn't run into it before?
Yeah, sure. Short 1-minute elevator pitch. PLC Next is an open PLC platform. And when I say open, it means really three things. It's IIoT ready. So out of the box, it has IIoT configuration built into it. And that can be done through standard function block libraries, or it can also be done through our Linux side. So it is also a Linux platform out of the box. So you can program in C++, Java, Python, whatever you want to do, right? And you can do that. And then the other thing is it's revolutionary because you don't have to pick either one. You can do them both at the same time. So it is an open PLC platform. We run different softwares on it, but what we'll be featuring tomorrow is the PLC Next Engineer platform, and just kind of treating it like a standard PLC as you would on a machine, just with that added functionality of being able to get things out to a cloud.
Okay, great. And then how are we connecting to the data coming off of PLC Next? That is our buddy Kyle over at Kepware.
Yep. Yes, sir. Yeah. And there's an ongoing theme, I think, with some of these, and not just because we sponsored this, that Kepware is used. But yeah, we're going to be connecting up to the PLC Next via our OPC UA client driver. So the PLC Next has a built-in UA server, which is actually kind of a trend I'm seeing a lot with some of these hardware providers having that integrated UA server. So we'll be taking that and then through Kepware's IoT Gateway feature, we're actually going to be piping that data over to our friends at Influx DB. And there's actually a lot of work that the two companies have done, myself and Jay, and trying to foster a really neat sort of template or payload that you can configure in Kepware to stream data directly to Influx over HTTP or HTTPS. So really cool stuff.
Okay. And Jay, once the data is there in your world, you're going to be getting high resolution data with a lot of precision. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we sort of hit Influx DB, just to give a broad overview of what we do. So, we're a purpose-built time series database. The function here is that we're schema on write. You should be able to ingest all your tags from your PLC without never having to worry about a schema design. You can work with that and fix that later down the line. So if you have thousands of tags, we don't mind bringing it in and we'll work with it. The idea here is we're down to sort of, just depending on precision that you want, we can work with data with a timestamp within seconds all the way down to nanoseconds. But our main goal is to be able to provide a layer of analytics on top for you to be able to basically operate on that raw data, whether you were going to be aggregating on that data to find a certain mean level over time, whether we're going to be then looking at sort of forecasting techniques, or we're going to be basically transforming that data before we pass it on to our next operation. So there's two roles that Influx DB is going to play. In this case, we're going to be a historian, a data historian for Dawid and his process, which he's going to be pulling from, and we'll get onto that in a second. And then I'm also going to be using it to create essentially an observability panel for the machine or for the PLC Next that we're going to be looking at, so we can actually sort of drive real-time insight from that device that can be seen at a global level. We're all going to be doing this from Influx DB Cloud, but we do have the ability to run Influx DB locally as well. So it really sort of depends what people are looking for, whether they still want an air gap solution, whether they don't. So, but yeah, so really excited to see what we get up to with it and get messy on next Wednesday. I guess I'm passing over to Dawid next for his next part.
Well, quick question for you, Jay, on the Grafana piece of it.
Yeah.
So you're going to build out a little bit of a dashboard, play around with Grafana, show the audience what that looks like?
Yeah, so if people didn't know, sort of Grafana is a open source visualization tool. They are kings within the observability space, but they are also used heavily within industrial IoT. You can imagine anything from line graphs to heat maps to, you can actually now build small HMI interfaces with Grafana. And they provide a series of connectors or plugins that allow you to connect to just about any data source that involves time series data. We've been partners for years with I think from literally our inception. And so my goal here is to show off how you can connect via different connection methods between Influx DB and then some of the cool dynamic features you have available to you. So you can sort of drill into certain parts of your data and then jump back out to a much sort of aggregated view as well.
So Jay, where's the aggregation happening at? Is it happening within Influx or is it happening in Grafana?
So the aggregation happens at our level when we do our queries. We have all these built into our own query languages. That's SQL and Influx QL, depending. We'll have a cool little feature that we run with Dawid as well, where we basically run Software Toolbox almost as a task engine in the background, where we can run some of those aggregations automatically and write those back into another table in Influx DB, so we can have those on the fly without needing to keep running those aggregations constantly. So yeah, in that case, the aggregations are dynamic at the Grafana level though. So we run our static queries, but Grafana injects dynamically the ranges that we want to aggregate by. So it's basically a good relationship in terms of building dynamic queries. Yeah.
Awesome. Grafana pin, when we come back later on in conversation, I want to talk about PLC Next and Grafana. Zach, that's a heads up for you. Okay, so now here's a huge problem that we run into, right? We've done something at the enterprise level, and now we've got to deliver whatever that is back to the operation. Have we ever noticed that everybody knows what middleware to be able to use to get data out of operations to enterprise? It's a head scratcher often to reverse that and bring it back securely. But we know a guy. Dawid?
Yeah, here comes the data plumber, as we call it.
That's right.
Your terminology. So what we're going to basically do, and thank you, Jay, for kind of putting everything in context. So as Kyle writes, Jay stores, what we're going to do is we're taking one of our products called OPC Router. Now, OPC Router is exactly that middleware that Jeff has referred to, that allows you to connect to a plethora of different data sources, which include databases and OPC servers, etc. But for practical purposes here, we are connecting to the Influx DB, and we are basically querying data out of the Influx DB. Now, to add on to that concept of, well, there's basic analytics, there's aggregations, etc., similar to what you can do in Grafana, we are also running, and I like the way that Jay has mentioned it, saying it's a little task engine. So it's a bit of a calculation engine that's built into this middleware, which is very visual. So we'll show you the guys from scratch how to build it from a visual perspective. And we'll just run a quick query against the Influx database to kind of calculate the mean average over 5 minutes of a specific tag, for example. And then we'll do two things with that. The one thing is we want to take the result of that moving average and just store it into another table or measurement, if we talk, from an Influx terminology point of view, so that Grafana could query that again if we really wanted to. But secondly, is drive that data, and whether that's now just an average or a mean, or whether it's a set point of manipulation eventually in future from a machine learning model, drive it straight down to the plant floor, so that the PLC can ingest that new set point, for argument's sake, or that average in terms of what it is we're trying to do the mean, for the operator to kind of judge where he is. So to really complete that closed loop of from writing to storing to driving back from enterprise down to control. And
I've got some questions for you. On the security side, right? If you look at the architecture, you have arrows pointing from potentially a cloud service. It could also be on-prem. It doesn't have to be in the cloud, but regardless, you're going to have some level of enterprise data that, let's just say it's in your business environment, not the cloud. But following the Purdue model, right? We are outbound only from the control system to typically a DMZ, then up to enterprise. So walk me through the security piece of OPC Router and how, as somebody who is responsible for OT security, how do I sign off or sign on to, yeah, this is the right way to do this? using OPC Router?
Yeah, so with OPC Router, Alan, and that's security we should never forget about. So with OPC Router, you have all these different plugins you configure. So obviously there's a plugin, which is REST API based, which is how we actually get the data from the Influx DB component. So that's got its own secure component in terms of username. We're using tokens in this instance. So there's a token that's basically been created from the Influx DB, which I've created myself because I'm also an admin on that DB, that only gives me reading rights, and another token that only gives me writing rights to a specific database and to a specific table for that matter. So that's the first side, and then there's certain ports, etc., that's associated with that. On the OPC side, we're using UA as the communication model, and with UA, it's a certificate-based authentication component, so that you independently handling the security components, and then rightfully say from an architectural perspective, the best practice is do it via a DMZ component, so you only open and close ports if and where required. So maybe the architecture that Jeff has drawn up in 5 minutes doesn't illustrate the security component around it, but trust me, we've had our fair share already. Late last night between myself and Kyle still with security. So we're trying to, we have resolved that now in order to make sure that not only we communicate, but we communicate securely between each other.
But if I was a customer who said, okay, I need to get the data from Influx back into my PLC, but I have to be outbound from my control system to the DMZ, would you recommend using OPC Router and then maybe something like Data Hub at that point, or something
that's
like
what
that?
I would have suggested now. So with Data Hub, we have the ability to do tunneling and the ability to use a DMC to only open and close, to never basically have an open port. So if the security really has to be tightened down and you've got multiple hops you do through, we'd use a product, which is another product we do, which is called Cogent Data Hub, that allows you to channel and tunnel that traffic securely over OPC, but without opening unnecessary ports for that matter.
Yeah, and I think that what I'm trying to drive to is that I think that for our purposes here, it's going to be, we're trying to, streamline to understand the data movement and what the opportunities are. But the one thing about Software Toolbox that's always been very impressive is the idea of that data plumber idea, right? It's literally like, we don't care what your data is. We don't care where it's coming from. We don't care if you need to be outbound persistent, or if you need to be token certificate or what have you. You have the tool set that can do that, and works seamlessly with Kepware, works seamlessly with PLC Next, and with our cloud. And even we saw in the previous workshop where we can leverage that for SAP, right? So very impressive.
And that was kind of my question, is that, with our architecture, we're going back to PLC, but between OPC Router and also Data Hub as a tool we can plug into this architecture, where else can we go? Well, I mean, where else do you want to go, right? Exactly. It's the beauty of that middleware and that hub. Hey, let's real quick, I just want to come back, Jay, a couple questions for you. And Alan, I think you might have some too for Jay. Walk us through the Influx is 10 years now, I think, right? It's been
2013 it was founded. That was the first pull request coming in. So
yeah, and like $200 million of funding in the last year. I mean, this is a big deal. This isn't a small mom and pop open source operation. Help us understand Influx, the business model, right? Is there free? Is there open source? What if there is pay? What do you pay for? Like, how's that work?
Yeah. So we went through an interesting history of trying to develop where our bottom line is when it comes to open source, and where do people start paying, and how do we keep our lights on, essentially. And if you go back through the endless Reddit threads when we decided to make high availability closed source, it's quite something to behold. So I wasn't part of the company at that time, but I heard it was a war zone for a few weeks. So but yeah, so essentially we started off open source. we really racked up the numbers. I think we're up to over 750,000 constant instances of open source just in the wild. We don't know what they're doing a lot of the time. So the open source drag for us has always been high. The problem that we've always had is saying, hey, how do we then turn these people into people that want to pay for our product? Because if the open source does everything we need, how do we make that pay us? So we sort of devised two, and you have more of an on-prem version, which is Influx DB Enterprise, which will soon be renamed to Influx DB Clustered. This is your high availability. It sits on site. It can be fully air-gapped. It is yours to control and how many sort of clusters you want to spin up, etc. And this gives people the highest amount of flexibility when it comes to controlling like their own instance of Influx DB. We also sort of safeguard a few features beneath there, such as support and everything else that comes with it that, you know, apart from what we do in the community. The next big step that we took was coming into Influx DB Cloud and our SaaS solutions. We now offer two in that area. We have Influx DB dedicated. You can literally imagine that like clustered, but we actually spin up the clustered instance for you and we operate that for you within our own cloud. But you are the sole tenant for us within that dedicated structure. So that's all based on a subscript, like a license subscription model. And we keep the lights on. You talk to our support team. We spin up how many clusters we think you need and address that as such. The next one that we have is serverless. This is where most people sort of leapfrog to if they're from an open source and they want to become a paid customer. This is basically our cloud service. It has a free tier that we operate on your behalf. And then you can jump up to a pay-as-you-go tier and you pay for queries and your rights and your overall storage. So that's kind of how we now operate our business model in terms of bringing in money. I would say where we bring in most of our money is through enterprise. That seems to be where people really, the big deals lie for us, the big fish, a lot of our sales guys like to call it, big whales. But we've seen a huge steady growth for people that just want to use pay as you go as well. But that also comes with a lot of people with discrepancy. They want as much as they can for their change. They say, so if I run so many queries, how much is it costing me per 100 queries or so? So it's an interesting market to deal with. I feel like a lot of the time it's a race to the bottom when it comes to databases. It's like how cheap can you store it, but I still want all the performance in the world. And it's sort of like now for us, it's trying to evolve value add as well as performance as well. So that's kind of like our next step into making money along our journey.
Okay. So I have a few questions on your multi-tenant and single tenant architecture. Do you have, because if you've dealt within this realm of, trying to isolate and segregate data from different companies or using a tenant, do you have a model where everything is single tenant, or do you have a model where you have multi-tenant, where you have some shared resources and compute? How are you handling that?
Yeah, so with dedicated, that is purely their own tenant operated by us, and that is completely segregated from anyone else.
Is it a container, or is it how are you handling the compute?
We operate that in our own region and as its own Kubernetes cluster that is completely its own. And then basically we run that on AWS, and we have that with its own S3 buckets, with its own basically container policies in that area. So it's completely segregated from anyone else with that tenant. Serverless is different. It's all separated by organization. You can imagine it as just one big monster cluster. And then we provide the segregation inbuilt to Influx DB. So what you'll see,
logical, not physical segmentation, right?
Exactly. So a lot of the time what you'll see in open source, if you spun up an open source account now, we have an organization structure, and in an organization structure, that's like your highest level abstraction of containerization, if you want to call it, because you keep all your own dashboards, your database, everything within that. Is if you're part of that organization, you're only part of that organization. And then we've started bridging the ability to be part of multiple organizations, which has been a feature people wanted for a long time. But yeah, there is a very hard virtual segregation with serverless.
So if I want to host my own container with Influx DB in my own AWS instance, is that feasible? Do I have to can I get from like GitHub or somewhere that container that's got the configuration in it, bring it over and spin that up, or how does that work?
Correct. So you got two options there. If you want to go down the open source route, yeah, just pull our Docker container and go ham. There's a few Helm charts available. That's actually not even supported by us. It's supported by community members that even for a, because as open source is single node. So for me, running a single node Influx DB in Kubernetes doesn't make too much sense unless you're running it as a much bigger operation. But some people want to use it in Venom no matter what. So that's all community run. If you want to then take our enterprise solution or clustered solution, you can then just spin that up with it with Helm or with Terraform, whatever you want to do, and you can spin that up in your own AWS instance. Absolutely.
Okay, I've got Jeff. You cut me off when you want to transition. I'll just keep asking questions. But
hey, Zach, quick question. All right, one more, Alan.
All right. So my question is around the architecture or structure behind. We're talking about a time series historian, so people can understand the difference between like a circular file or SQL, where you have a relational tables. Like help us understand how you're handling the actual data and how that format looks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this sort of boils down to the fun and murky water of, why we've been invested into for 200 million. I didn't even realize, obviously, gone on 200 million now. That structure has evolved through the versions of Influx DB. If you look between 1.x and 2.x, it was completely proprietary. Although open source, it was proprietary, and it was based on this TSM structure. And it was its own file system. We store everything based on the timestamp as the key. And then you have a series of tags as a notation, which forms part of the primary key to separate your data and so forth. It's great, runs really efficiently and has for a long, long time. But we've now moved into Influx DB 3 or 3.0, where we're actually leveraging a lot more of the open source ecosystem. So you can think of it a little bit more akin to like a Databricks or a Snowflake. But in terms of the technologies that we're using, we now have our storage layer as Parquet files. So these are interoperable with things like Snowflake and Databricks. Next layer up from that, our query engine is called Apache Data Fusion. This basically provides querying with SQL, InfluxQL as native languages. And then we sort of encompass that all together in another software development package called Apache Arrow, which is basically an in-memory columnar data format. So so basically it all boils down to us being a columnar-based time series database. So you can imagine it a little bit like ClickHouse, but with schema on write and that flexibility inbuilt with a high emphasis on sort of close to real-time querying, and it's basically ingesting as hard as we can as well. That was our two main emphases that we try and differentiate ourselves with.
Thank you. That's a good answer. Last thing I will say is as far as the Phoenix Contact Next PLC, I really want this to move into a terminology that we use on a regular basis. I'm not saying the Phoenix Context has to do this, but I consider the Opto 22 and the Phoenix Contact next gen PLCs, right? They do the fundamental requirements of a PLC that we need, but they truly open up the avenues and the doors for us to be able to leverage things like Node-RED, things like Python, right? So we're opening up the control system layer, that hard layer 2 and layer 3, where it's IO, analog, digital, and PID and loop control and shutdowns and safeties, all those things, and we're now allowing that. There's always been locked data, isolated data, into this new world of IoT, IIoT, and even ERP. So next gen PLC, Zach, that's what we're talking about here. You're muted.
So PLC next gen is, as many nexts as we can get into it, I guess.
That's right.
I like it as a term.
Yeah.
Zach, can you
No,
talk?
I mean, one of the things. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go for it.
I was going to say, just, with the terminology there, Alan, it is one of the things that we run up against. And being in marketing, it's, SEO terms, what are you looking for? And 3 years ago, everything was, it needs to be labeled as an edge device. So, I mean, if you just type in edge now, industrial edge, you'll find a million products, all that offer something, whether it's an edge device or not, or an edge gateway or an edge something. I mean, and I actually, I just had our apprentices in, and I asked them what the edge was. And they kind of just, I said it was the YouTube guitarist. But then they were like, I don't even know what that means. So they, I explained to them the edge is wherever your customer wants it to be, because really it depends on, IT, OT, it depends on what's going on. So Alan, I do appreciate that. I think a next gen PLC is a good way of kind of describing the Opto and the PLC Next. And that's kind of what we're hoping for. And it's one of these things when we launched it in the US in 2019, I remember sitting in a room and like writing all these things down that I could do. And I was like, who is going to do this? Like, who's going to disrupt their entire control system to do things the way they are? And now, we're 4 years away from that. And I think it's not who is going to do this, who isn't doing this is the real question. Like, who isn't looking at this to take their platform from a standard Industry 3.0 type thing?
Yeah, it's the same question around who's using, OpenAI and large, knowledge languages or language models. If you're not using it today, you're behind already.
Possible. That's a divisive. Divisive? I don't feel like that's the right word. That's a emotional statement.
Divisive is right.
I don't think it's emotional. I think it's factual. I think that if you actually start looking at what the CFOs, CEOs. I mean, look, I work for 3M, right? I was put on the AI task force for 3M. This is not a question on whether or not a company should use large language models. That question has been answered. The question is, okay, if we're not using it, we're falling behind to our competitors. But here's the big problem. How do we leverage these models and keep our IP secure, keep our content within ourselves, right? So if you're not using it today, I can tell you from a senior leadership of a Fortune 500 company, you feel like you're behind. It's just the truth of where we're at today, sitting in an environment where you have smaller companies who are more nimble that can take a lot more and quicker advantage of these tools that are now available. And if you find yourself in the same place with a PLC, right? So you've got and it doesn't matter if you use Allen Bradley, Delta V, Schneider, whatever, right? These proprietary locked-in PLCs, the older generation type of PLC. If that's what you're continuing to use, you're going to continue to run into the exact same problem we're dealing with today. How do I get the data out of this proprietary system into a historian? How do I monetize this data from my OT to get value and efficiencies from, having to run our company different? And it's look, I'll give you a perfect example. When I worked for Air Energy, we had Wonderware and we had Allen Bradley and Schneider and all those things. And I'm telling you, our control system was, I wouldn't say best in class, but it was up there. I mean, we'd spent a lot of time and energy and money building standards and doing things the right way. And then our CEO went to a conference and he saw SaaS. He came back from that conference. He said, we're going to leverage SaaS. He bought a site license and all this stuff.
Not software as a service, SaaS.
Not software as a service, SaaS.
Okay.
Here's what happened. We ended up, the OT space was critical chain for that project because they had to have the data from our systems to be able to input into SaaS to make it valuable.
Right.
We went a whole year and a half and then just completely turned down the entire system because we couldn't get the data out of our proprietary systems fast enough and in a rate that would actually support the software.
Right.
And it's the same issue we're dealing with today. How do I get this data out of these systems and then leverage it for actual value, right? Because look, Influx DB, can I get the data up there in the Influx DB and use Grafana and all these things? Yes. But if you're not solving a problem and you're not driving value, what are you doing? You're wasting time. It's cool. It's awesome. But ultimately, we all want to do the same thing. We want to help our companies be more sustainable, more reliable, and last longer so that we all have a job and can feed our families. And so we need to be driving value. And that's why I appreciate the answers. I appreciate the ideas around, look, Kepware and Software Toolbox. You guys are critical. You guys are critical for us to be able to do the things that we're going to need to do with our legacy systems that no one's going to go rip out. No one's going to go rip these things out. It's cost way too much money. So how do we do it in a way that we can continue to drive value for our companies, leverage Influx DB, leverage these open source tools that we have available now to us? How do we do it? And so, not to get on, I'll get off my soapbox now, but.
Well, I'm gonna put my soapbox across from yours and make this statement. Yeah, believe me, I'm all about making my job easier, but ChatGPT right now, I wouldn't build a solution around that. I just wouldn't. It's not ready. I've tried and tried to make it accurate, to make it trustworthy, to make it something.
That's the problem. The problem is you're wanting accuracy, not proficient, not effectiveness. Right? There's a difference. There's a difference between wanting accuracy and wanting to build an effective and processes and tools that help us do more faster and get to the outcome we're trying to get to in a more efficient way. If you're looking for accuracy, you're absolutely right. You can't use a large language model for accuracy because you don't have control of the inputs, right? But what you can use it for is you can use it for effectiveness and doing certain tasks that you have lower level people doing that would take days to do that you can now complete in hours.
Okay, so right? give me an example of this because I think
I'll give you a perfect
example. At the end of the day, accuracy is always still going to matter towards effectiveness.
I'll give you a perfect example. This is cognitive AI is what we're talking about. Right. The perfect example is this. I had to write a governance model. I had to build a governance model and write a document around governance model.
Yep.
So what did I do? Right. In the past, I had a process I'd go through and it would take me 2 or 3 days to get a 15 or 20 page full governance model done. This time, what I did was I literally opened up ChatGPT, started a new chat. I began to tell it, hey, you're going to act as a OT integrator, whatever I'm doing, OT security integrator. And this is what you're going to do. And then I literally just started pumping in inputs on the parameters I wanted it to that chat window to work within.
Yep.
And I got it to where it would repeatable write me a summary statement of what I was trying to do. And once I trained the model to where I got it close, I said, now go write me a governance model for this and use these inputs. And it gave me a structure. And I said, okay, I took that structure. I made components. These are the components of a governance model. I took the components and I said, okay, now write me all these things. And then I ended up with a 20-page document. Once I had that, I had to go in and spend another 2 hours making it what I wanted. but it saved me literally days of work to get me to become to a place where I could then take it. This is the cognitive piece, right? This is not me trying to make it do the work.
Sure.
This is me saying, hey, put the structure together, give me some, and so it built this thing out. And then I went and made it exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
And it was
different, very different experience on my side doing the exact same process. But whether it's a partner agreement or some type of other contract or some type of other document, I've not seen those types of gains because what I'm getting back requires so much rework. But we're down a whole rabbit trail. Sorry to our guests. We'll probably just
we can still talk about that. I got a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it comes around to honestly what we're talking about, right? Is the interesting piece about Phoenix Contact is we are a manufacturer at the same time that we're selling products, right? So as we speak right now at our facility in Harrisburg, we are literally going through the exact same transition that a lot of manufacturers are going through right now, taking existing closed systems and trying to migrate them into a more open platform so that you can get data to where it needs to go, right? And I was talking with our building administrator, Russ Kolacek, who is familiar with Ignition, and he's done Niagara platforms, and we were talking about the ability to get data from a machine out of the OT side and usable side, usable data that you can use. And he said that his idea isn't to get the data out to just dump it into an AI. He said, because the AI itself doesn't know what he knows. And that's the important thing. It doesn't know what he knows, but he could teach an AI to analyze the things that he's spending his day looking at, or that we would spend, 3 people looking at crawling through data over the next, 4 months, trying to figure out what's going on here, to flag and to say, hey, this is something we should look at, to say, instead of crawling through this data and spending all your time going through the data, here's some ideas of where you can go look at. And I think that is the big thing that Jeff, that when I use ChatGPT, I quickly learned that is not the answer, right? ChatGPT is not the answer to whatever you're looking for, but it is very much the guide to get you there. It is that tool that you're going to use to get you 80% of the way and take away all that legwork that you would have done. Alan, I'm sure creating what you were creating there probably would have taken you days, if not weeks, to create the actual format of what you were looking at. And then you still would have had to make it right. Now we're just talking about taking what is there, formatting it correctly, using the piece that is repeatable and usable, and then getting us 80, 85, 90% of the way there, and then analyzing the data at that last point. You're getting the people that know what's going on in there. And that is like the interesting part of this whole conversation that we're talking about here. Is what the tip of the iceberg is. Data from OT was closed off forever. Like forever, it had been closed off, and it was only on-prem. You could get it, or it was only on machine. If you were lucky, you had an HMI that was sitting there that gave you the information. And then you had to somehow go in and get that data without disrupting the whole process. Now the data is free. The data is free. It can get out and go where it needs to go. And the stuff that you can do on Influx and the stuff that you can do in Software Toolbox is amazing. And it's, it is a Pandora's box here, because the possibilities are endless. And it's hard for me as a marketing person, because someone comes to me and says, what can I do with PLC Next? And the answer is, everything basically. You could blow away the entire platform and run it as a Linux box. Whatever you want to do is fine. Should you do that? I don't know. And that's what we're getting to on this whole conversation is ChatGPT. Technically you could write Python script to get your PLC Next to run ChatGPT queries, from the hardware. Should you do that? I don't know. Probably there's a way to teach it to make it make sense. I don't know that we should do it, but you could definitely do it. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but it's a really interesting point you guys are talking.
I think we have an upcoming episode that we need to schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do that for the fall. In the fall, let's do an Integrate Live around how to incorporate LLMs and AI into our processes, or talk about should we. I think that would be probably even better than trying to incorporate. But and I'm just telling you right now, Rick Bellotta, I don't know if you're in our audience right now, but Rick Bellotta is going to join us for that. If I have to figure out whatever I need to do to make that happen, because I love his position on this, and I want it to be heard on the record.
I want to go back to one
PLC,
thing.
No. PLC.
This is not ChatGPT. This is about Phoenix Contact.
Okay.
I want to go back to something that I found fascinating on your comment. And I'm going to ask a question, and your answer to this question is going to be very important. And I
Who are
hope
you
you
asking?
answer correctly. I'm asking Zach.
Okay.
You're a manufacturing plant. You're updating legacy PLCs.
Mhm.
What product are you using?
We're using PLC Next, of course. I mean, for us,
That's the answer I was waiting for. So here's what I love about that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say in places where it makes sense, because there's certain processes like our ASRS, system that is running our logistics center is based off of a Siemens platform, right? We're still using that platform, but we're integrating PLC Next into it,
Yeah.
So I wouldn't just blanket statement say we're replacing everything with PLC Next.
Right.
where
But
it makes
here's
sense,
what's
we are putting
fascinating about that to me. Here's the key. You don't have very many manufacturing plants that are also a PLC, vendor that's creating a PLC piece and then using their own equipment on their manufacturing. You have two that I know of, Opto22 and Phoenix Contact. Both are manufacturing facilities. Both of them are using their own hardware to make their processes and manufacturing more efficient. And you know what that gets us? You guys will actually have the pain points that we have in manufacturing when we want to use your tool. And so there's a clear, like a drive towards making the product what it needs to be to really be able to deliver the outcome we're trying to gain, right? So for me,
Alan,
that's why I love both Opto and Phoenix, because you guys use
it's literally sitting in a digitalization committee meeting last week saying this is what we need to do. So
yeah,
We call it in the IoT world.
sorry, I talked over you there.
Sorry, we call it in the IT world eating your own dog food. If you can eat your own dog food as a company, then you know you've got a product that people want to use.
Yep.
Well, I think about
we call it walking the talk, but I like that too.
That's better than eating your own dog food. All right. I want to shift the question around. I want to shift the conversation just a bit, guys. There was an announcement that got made a couple months ago that wasn't quite, I don't think I heard about it in as many channels as I would have liked to. And so I wanted to ask you, Kyle, a little bit around Kepware and Kepware Plus.
Sure.
Not something we've talked about yet inside of the Integrate Live community. It's not something we're going to even demonstrate next Wednesday, but just for a nice little soundbite. And for those that are listening, I'll probably use this later. So try to give me a good answer here.
Make it nice and polished. Yeah.
Yeah, give me a good soundbite. Tell us about Kepware Plus. Why does it matter, and what makes you excited about it? From your
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question. I'm going to try to shorten, give a little bit of history here around Kepware and actually sort of how the demand for data has changed over time, and then I think Kepware Plus will make a little bit more sense there. So if you look at let's say early 90s, Jay, you weren't born yet. I was barely born, but early 90s, right? So we had this interoperability problem of, hey, we need the Siemens PLC to talk to, some other, like an Emerson, whatever, so there's interoperability problems. And then OPC Foundation got formed and said, hey, we'll help take care of this, no problem. Kepware was a very early adopter and partner for OPC. So early 90s, built a few drivers, part of this OPC thing. We said, hey, great, we're pretty good at this. So throughout the 90s, early 2000s, developed a ton of drivers, got really good at that, became very niche in that space. Then we kind of discovered, well, okay, now, we'll bring it to mid 2000s, 2010s. All of a sudden we're starting to see, well, hey, data is becoming much more important. It's becoming the new oil is, it's a common phrase there. And suddenly we've seen there's actually a lot of value that we can get for connecting to devices outside of the factory. So we started looking at, hey, can we connect into HVAC systems with BACnet? Can we do stuff with oil and gas specific equipment? And then from a northbound side, like, hey, this cloud thing is coming around. Maybe we hop on board of that. So we started developing these things where all of a sudden Kepware can become this sort of very agnostic and decoupled platform where you can just send all of your data. And then finally, now, somewhat modern day, we've discovered that people are starting to think about connectivity a lot differently. They're starting to think about it much more strategically. So it's no longer, connectivity is no longer a point solution. It's becoming much more of an enterprise-wide strategic conversation, which is great because we realize, well, we have the tools for that, but maybe what's missing is how do we scale this out effectively? So we made a few changes. So one is, we took our packaging, our licensing, and just said, hey, we're not going to change any technology. We're just going to change how it's packaged. And that allows things to scale more. So instead of a point solution where, hey, you're buying, one or two drivers and a plugin, we're saying, hey, if you're really serious about connecting all of your devices, getting all your data in one place across your entire enterprise, well, how about one license that unlocks everything in Kepware, and then you can just repeat that quantity-wise, which is great. So we had a lot of success with that, and I promise I'm getting a Kepware Plus. But what ends up happening, now, right, is, hey, all of a sudden,
for the soundbite purpose.
Yeah, here it is.
That's not Kepware Plus.
Yeah, I'm going there. I'm getting there. We're talking about AI and crap. Give me like 30 seconds. Anyways, so now we have these customers who are looking at, well, great, I have 100 Kepware servers out there that's getting all my data. How in the world am I going to manage all of this? So that's where Kepware Plus comes in. So we said, well, why don't we have a single pane of glass, SaaS-based? We'll handle everything on the back end that allows you visibility into all of your Kepwares and the ability to go in and configure all of those instances. And I want to be careful here. We're not sending industrial data to the cloud. It's just configuration data. Okay. So if you're someone who is very serious about enterprise connectivity and are trying to monitor that entire fleet of Kepwares, you have one pane of glass to be able to do all of that.
Okay. Wow. And multiple permissions. So like if I've got an integration firm that I want to give access to configuration for some of it, but not all of it, of course.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially version control.
So I want to be careful about that term. You've got visibility into that, but in no way is it a deployment platform. Okay.
Got it.
Yeah.
Do you guys have built-in? You have built-in dashboards, health. You have, so in other words, it's one thing if I've got 100, Kepware servers to have just 100 of them on the screen, but how do I know where, like when I go into that single pane of glass, is it already kind of built in and configured to say, hey, this is where you need to be looking at because this is where you're having your problems?
So that's coming. And again, this is a relatively new product, like or technically 2.0 now, but relatively new still. But that is something that is coming for sure. I just got a little mock-up preview of it a couple weeks ago. I don't know timeline around it, but that is coming.
That's the roadmap, though, right? The roadmap is we're going to bring all this together, and then we're going to show the end user, hey, this is everything you have, but this is where you need to be looking. This is where you're having issues.
Correct. Yeah. And really just getting sort of that metadata around each of those instances. So even down to the level of, hey, with this deployed Kepware in this particular factory, what drivers am I using? What plugins am I using? I can view the event log now from any of those servers.
So let me ask you a question. And
sure.
Again, Jeff, you can cut me off whenever you want, but so let's say I have a manufacturing line has Allen Bradley, a Control Logics and a Siemens or what have you. Can I take a template of, I have this device, it's already configured, it's configured the way I want, and then create an instance of that? Or are you going down kind of that orchestration of the different stuff? Or
So it sounds like, and if I understand your question, it sounds like what you're asking for is, do we have the ability to essentially save a project file or save a configuration?
I know you can do that now. I think it's going more towards kind of the orchestration of, hey, we're now bringing up all the configuration. You can create some models or some templates or some UDTs and then create instances off those. So if I'm going to deploy a line and I have a line that is already that line, can I go, oh, I'm going to stand up another instance of this line and just boom, right click, new instance, name it, and now it's up and running. I push it to the server I want.
Library. Is that what you're describing? Yeah.
Kinda.
Yeah. Sort of. Yeah. So we're looking at that. I think the missing piece there, or the important piece, is that there's still a manual process of going on-prem, deploying that Kepware, connecting that to the agent, and then pushing down that configuration. You can do that for sure.
Right. All right.
All I'm saying is let me know if you or your developers want some input. I have a lot.
Gladly. You'll be hearing from our team really soon. Trust me. I will take you up on that.
All right. Hey, guess what? That was a fast hour, and there's still questions to be answered. I'm curious around the PLC Next door. I was plugging around on it this morning. I saw a Grafana option on the PLC Next door. I want to learn more about the PLC Next door. So next Wednesday, Zach, if nothing else, I'd love to just see a little walkthrough on the PLC Next store, because that's a concept of a virtual store for a PLC. What? How's that work? I love the plug-in architecture of that. And want to talk too about the concept of OPC Router being able to be embedded onto PLC Next or onto another edge device and what that looks like. So, but we're out of time, and had, I think, 40, 45, 50 people on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for that audience that plugged into that. We really do appreciate that. Alan, you had a ton of people agreeing with you on your comments, so well done. I mean, look at that. I will leave us just on this quick note. Please share this with someone that you think is that needs to see it. IntegrateLive.com is the website where you can get all of the previous episodes. You can join the community there and continue the conversation. And until next week, same time, we will see you on the virtual workshop. All right. Everybody, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.